Episode 39, part 2 of our series on Harry Hopman, Mr. Harry Hopman.
Yeah, let's get rolling. Tennis history.
Let's get rolling.
Knowing Harry Hopman, who he was, what he accomplished, I really think that all goal-oriented tennis players should be students of the game, and therefore know tennis history. Maybe just be an amateur historian, but know the game.
Yeah.
Going back in time, here's an example. Ask a group of kids here in the U.S., I did this the other day, what's a pop fly? And they did. No idea. Baseball used to be part of the American fabric. It's not anymore.
That's crazy.
So pop fly, baseball's hit up in the air. Simple enough. And then you have a group of tennis kids put their rackets down by the fence, by the net. And then very easily you throw a ball up in the air and see if they can catch it. Then what you do, have a bit of fun, is you hit the balls up as high as a skyscraper.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing about baseball, when you're watching baseball practice, because you don't want to have the left field player, the center field player, right field, you don't want the three outfielders to collide. So the coach takes the fungo bag, hits a ball up in the air, and everybody just looks to see if they can catch it.
Yeah.
But knowing a bit of baseball will make you coach tennis better. Hand-eye coordination, just again, pressure of catching the pop flies we're sharing.
Yeah.
With a pop fly, what do you learn by watching a pop fly? Okay, what do you learn by asking people about their grandparents? What do you learn by asking people about Harry Hopman? So much, so much. From part one, there's a little feedback, because obviously we have a week in between.
Mm-hmm.
I think several comments, but one is we were thankful for just honoring his name and his life. Another coach said that he thinks every Australian tennis player has a bit of Harry Hopman in them. Mm-hmm. And then also, too, just the dreams to hear about, the hard-driven principles. Another one is hard work rules the day.
Yeah.
Also from part one, comments I made on Donald Trump. I was not going in the direction of politics, although I do think that the Minutemen should have been there in 59 seconds. With just pointing out here what Harry Hopman shared about New Yorkers on a national TV show. So it's in part one of this series. Brashness, tone. Brashness doesn't mean that it's obnoxious. The story of two New Yorkers, pedestrians crossing the street and almost gets run over by a taxi cab. The pedestrian yells at the cab driver, "You almost killed me."
Yeah.
And the cab driver says, and there's a little profanity going back for it. He yells back louder, "No, I saved your life." Then the intensity continues. Hopman, living in New York for a short period of time, just expressed how he liked the transparency, the New Yorkers, no hidden agenda, just telling you how they felt.
Yeah.
With friendship doesn't make the ball go over the net. Diplomacy is not really needed in tennis. Hopman, without really saying one word, there had to be no discussion, no explanation, just go. Mm-hmm. I'll go through Matt Claure, who spends a lot of time here, spent a lot of time with us over the last 10 plus years. His father was here. His father worked for Ernie Claure. Mm-hmm. And Ernie said this, but this is in my notes.
His father worked for Harry, right?
Worked for Harry Hopman, yeah. But Hopman would step on the court. You'd see a non-runner. He's patrolling the courts in his golf cart. And so, again, he didn't have to be the New Yorker where they're arguing like the pedestrian and the cab driver. But he would feed 4 tough balls, and he would just make sure, and it's not, feed the ball softly, but make sure that the kid didn't get a racket on any of the 4. And then he would just walk off, and the message was clear. Footwork rules.
Yeah.
Here's interesting. Between part one and part two, one of my former students, Josh Scheinblad, he plays at Citadel for Chuck Creasy. Chuck is a highly reputable coach who worked for Mr. Hopman. He was at Clemson for most of his career. I think Chuck's coached over 40 years now in college. Mm. There's just a few years where he did some work with a federation in Asia. Then he did some work with some juniors. But character coach, started with Hopman. So I asked my student, Josiah, I said, tell me a story that Creasy tells about Hopman. He goes, well, he tells many. He goes, but here, my favorite one is when he was being interviewed by Mr. Hopman. He had to give a lesson to Mr. Hopman's wife, Lucy. And at the end of the lesson, Lucy offered Chuck $20 for the lesson. Mm-hmm. Chuck did not accept the money and was hired.
Yeah.
Chuck tells his players that he didn't want to work for Mr. Hopman for money. And it goes on where, money should not be number one. It's people versus profit, passion versus profit.
Basically, if he would have taken the $20, you would.
Yeah, so he doesn't know that, but it's in the notes that he tells a story that thought that maybe it was a test, and if he had accepted the money, that he would not even be given the job.
Yeah.
But he no doubt was influenced by Mr. Hopman. All his players, Chuck Creasy's players, they all have great mile time. The inside joke is his tennis teams can show up on your campus, the opponent's campus, and take on the cross-country team. I remember Chuck being on the cover of Tennis Week, the late Eugene Scott. It went from Tennis Week to Tennis Weekly. Chuck used to run what was called Hell Week. First week, he would just put the players through the grind, and he wanted to say, see who could make it. He used to tease and say, I want to have the players at the end of practice where they get in their car, they can't sit down. But the theory is, if they could survive Hell Week, they could hang in there and be counted on in a tough match.
Yeah.
So similar to Bear Bryant, if our listeners have heard of the book, The Junction Boys, the late great Bear Bryant, the football coach, Hoffmans camps were the same. Be tougher than tough. Tracking the Hopman influence, so someone like Creasy, he coached Jay Berger, who became a top 10 player in the world. Berger, for many, many years, had a lot to do with the USTA. But early in his career, he coached Florida International University, and I've met some of the players when Jay was coaching FIU. And that's the way it works. It goes from Hopman to Creasy to Jay Berger. Mark Dixon played for Creasy. And Mark's father used to love to hit the backboard. So he'd come hit the backboard and he'd hang out and just watch us coach juniors. But I remember Mark had some problems with his knee. So instead of when all the players would run, Mark would have to hit the swimming pool. Just going through the notes, Andy Brandy, I was working with Andy Brandy. And then shortly after, we were working at All American Sports. And then Andy was working at Harry Hopmans, and he started working with Bonnie Gaduzak. She became a top 10 player in the world, former gymnast. But just think about, you're working within someone's game. That's you can't always say, okay, we're going to start from scratch. Christina Brandy, Joe Brandy coached Pete Sampras when he won his first Grand Slam, 1990 US Open.
Yeah.
But Christina Brandy, who became a world-class player, she spent time at Hoffmans at Bollettieri's. It's interesting she was at our place practicing one time. And I asked her coach if she would put on an exhibition, hit some balls for the juniors. And he said, really? Because you would think, because Joe was taught by Will Van Horn as a kid to play, that she would have really refined skills. But a lot of positives if someone can grow up in an environment. We mentioned that Bollettieri's was second. Bollettieri's was not the original boot camp here in West Florida.
Yeah.
It's kind of what wins, will or skill. You want to have both, but
a
long way down the road is will win. And if people can endure, the camps put on like a Harry Hopman.
Yeah.
Targets, hitting serves. Hopman used to put tennis ball cans on a court. The legend grows. I've heard only two players actually won. One was Peter McNamara. Is you'd hit the can, and Mr. Hopman set the can back down. If you hit it again, the very next ball, and he'd give you $1,000. So it's pretty tough to hit targets.
Yeah.
Mr. Hopman used to do this with, he'd get 10 $1 bills, two players playing, and 5 single bills in his left hand, 5 single bills in his right hand, and as each person would make it on fourth there. So the person to his right, the dollar bill out of his right hand would go to his left hand, and you would just play 2 points, serving, 2 and 2, and then once the $10 were in one hand, game over. So it's a pretty good way to let people know, quit making unforced errors.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's go with Ernie Claure. He was here. His granddaughter takes lessons with us, Cammie. He worked for Hopman from 1979 to 1982. He put out a little skit for us. So we had a little Q&A Saturday. Imitation is the highest form of flattery. So Ernie brought one player on the court. He hobbled like the elder statesman. So you have to figure, back to our original notes, at beginning notes, Hopman, he was in his 60s when he moved to the U.S. So when people were working for him in his 70s, he was not a spring chicken anymore.
Yeah.
But again, the story of feeding 4 balls, stopping, and so if somebody would make a movie, and they should, Harry Hopman, Ernie said he had his old blue headmaster racket that was in his golf cart. He guessed that they had 60 courts at Bardmore. I don't really know. That'd be interesting to find out. Obviously, it's been remodeled since. But just see a sea of tennis courts, and they'd actually rent courts elsewhere. And Ernie said that's what it was like on the 70s. And every court, of course, the ratio was 4-1, but every court's going.
Yeah.
Ernie made some comments on live ball versus dead ball feeding, where Hopman, it was so much live ball. You know, a line drill, where that's a dead ball for our listeners who are newer to tennis. You just feed the ball and there's no interactive play.
Yeah, someone just hits it and goes to the end of the line.
Yeah. Ernie said that Hopman used to always say, no ball ever comes to you perfectly. And I think that's where you're working with players that are down the road, more experienced players. That would be the opposite of, say, two of our other pillars, Vic Braden and Welby Van Horn. They wanted the ball fed just right when you're trying to get a kid going with solid technique.
Yeah.
So, yeah, beginners feed perfectly, but not when they get down the road. So you strict, no nonsense. Again, coming from Ernie, 4-1 ratio. Usually one player picking up balls, the other 3 hitting. Did a lot of 2-on-1s. He talked about being paid $200 a week. And some, the players were fined. He said at times it was up to $5 a ball. So, every time you would start, you'd take a basket of balls. You'd count how many balls in your basket. So if you had a basket with 90, and back in those days, it was just the one single hopper.
Yeah. I think my wife would have liked him.
With Paul McNamee, he confirmed, he goes, that guy would hit the ball 8 hours in a row. Feeding his fitness. I asked him about Mary Carrillo being the only female, and he said that he wasn't sure. We thought maybe Michelle de Palmer, but I think I would have guessed that Michelle de Palmer ended up, because of her father being one of the founders that was teaching at Bollettieri's. Then going back to McEnroe, people need to realize too that McEnroe, it wasn't just that he all of a sudden was told at the age of 11, 12 when Mr. Hopman started teaching, in his neighborhood, Port Washington. But McEnroe was a ball boy. So he knew the story of all these great Aussies because he learned to play tennis in Douglastown, but he spent a lot of time, obviously, at Forest Hills. So just to know the legend of Hopman and his players. With, Bob Brett passed away this year. He's born in 53. Started working for Hopman at age 26. You could do some research on the internet about Bob Brett and Harry Hopman. People said that Hopman had no children, but that Brett was like a son to him. Players do move on. You think of college tennis or junior tennis, there's a time span to it. The time span of someone coaching the game is obviously longer. think of Robbie Seguzo. Robbie Seguzo beat Connors at Wimbledon. And he said that Bob Brett gave him a great tip, which said, don't make Jimmy run. Hit right at him.
Yeah.
Because his footwork was a weapon.
Yeah. So
I know in the industry, Hopman was known as, and people, I don't think this is a very kind word, he's just a driller. A drill sergeant, drill tennis balls, do tennis drills. I don't think that was fair by any means, but if you read like Paul McNamee's book, Game Changer, that people would call Mr. Hopman and ask him for tips, such as the one that Brett gave Robbie Seguzo.
Yeah.
Some thoughts from Bob Brett based on his apprenticeship with Mr. Hopman. People need to get to the ball, so you need to run. Always be stretching the player, and there's an art to that.
Yeah.
Just push them a little bit further. Physical stress, that's how you make people mentally tough. They endure physical stress day in and day out. I saw a player, not to mention any names, but he was told, hey, it's not your night, but based on some circumstances, you got to do the dishes. And the head goes down. It's like, no, you got to be a little tougher than that.
Yeah.
Pain tolerance. All this is from Bob Brett. All the talk in the world will not create pain tolerance. People just yap and yap on a tennis court. I think initially, a tool of persuasion, there's a lot of verbiage, make you say a videotape for a first-time player. Stroke production, strategy, keep everything as simple as possible. Bob Brett, there's a clip on the internet where he's talking about being paid $200 a week, and he figured out that he was being paid $5, $6 an hour. It's a great story. He asked Mr. Hopman, what would I have to do to make more money? Work more hours? And Hopman just said, nothing. It was just $200. So he realized, I'm just going to not ask about money again.
Yeah.
Some quotes from Mr. Hopman. The lad should be thinking about winning the next point instead of grousing over the point he just lost. Yeah. Whatever you do, remember to pressure your opponent. Got to have great feet first and great hands second. Little changes make big differences. Be able to adapt. Like Tilden, you always change a winning game. You never change. Let me just say that correct. You never change a winning game. You always change a losing game.
Yeah. Make
a player an athlete first. Fitness will allow you to stay in the rally longer. You hear the term shot tolerance. If you can tolerate long, tough, grueling workouts. Another Hopman, breaking someone down physically is the same as breaking them down mentally. You put someone through a really difficult workout, they do generally break down mentally before they break down physically.
Yeah.
It's like the Marines. There's so many sayings that the Marines have.
We were talking about one of the advantages to doing some long distance running is just that, because you're the devil on your shoulders going, your knee hurts a little bit. Just that's good. It's enough. Quit.
No, we had some kids today doing the Jack Kramer 5 rounds, 3 minutes of skipping rope.
Yeah.
In between, shadow swing your weakest stroke. And one of the kids blurts out, "Can we do this in the shade?" So,
yeah.
It's pretty interesting. Hopman. Overcome difficulties, become stronger, hit hard, deep, and mostly cross court.
It's like Bjorn Borg's old thing. Well, I hit the ball cross court and sometimes down the middle, or was it down the middle and sometimes cross court?
Braden used to say that for $100,000 a week, he hits deep and down the middle, sometimes cross court.
Yeah.
So on the internet, there's not many clips, but you can actually watch some stroke reviews. And he's loose on the serve, shadow swing movement for strokes, but there's always movement. With common sense prevails. When you're told short, simple, compact swing, take it as early as possible, a lot of things will go right.
Yeah.
You know, if you this is an Australian Harry Hopman drill. Stand inside the baseline and play.
Yeah.
You got to be inside the baseline. So you have to do the Ken Rosewell. You got to play it on the rise.
Yeah.
And
can't have a bunch of moving parts.
Yeah. So it's just like
extra moving parts.
You know, hitting against the backboard. We've got a girl visiting here, and she has a very inefficient forehand. And I just had her say, okay, hit against the wall.
Yeah.
Start off slowly, loose it. It's just forehands only. We've got a square, and I hit in the square. Now just go faster and faster and faster. Then, then make it simple. Ready position, turn like a volley, make a circle. That's it.
I was talking about Agassi's strokes, yesterday in a video. Watching him play against Pete Sampras 20 years ago. And so compact, one of the best ground strokers ever. Best returners as well.
One thing about Hopman, too many pros today, they're making money and they're never stepping on the court. You got to appreciate Mr. Hopman. He patrolled the courts. He worked on the day he died.
Yeah.
Too many pros putting their own twist on things. Like, okay, this is, my 2 cents. How's it go? It makes no sense for everybody putting their own 2 cents. The old Aussie coaches, lots of profanity, but lots of straightforward truth. No sugarcoating. With Hopman, the bite was bigger than the bark. So people talk about it where he would tell you like it is, but it was quieter intensities because he ruled with the bite versus the bark.
Yeah.
That's one thing too with physical fitness. When your players are gasping, sucking for air, that's when you can whisper, guys, this is what you need to do next. Lots of his training sessions started with 5-mile runs. There was times where he'd run a camp where he'd pick out the hardest worker and a beer.
Yeah.
The hardest workers had a beer with him at the end, and everybody had to run 10 miles.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do that today.
Well, I think today, too, I think most people would complain about, why do we need to do long-distance running? That's not for tennis. And, they would get into that side of it.
Yeah, I know. Certainly this has been mentioned on our podcast, but we have visitors come in, and I say, okay, tell me about your tennis. And all these kids work with a physical trainer. I go, well, you may have the best physical trainer in the world, but you are out of shape.
Yeah.
You're out of shape. The Vince Lombardi, fatigue makes cowards of us all. On running, if you can run 5 miles, you can run 10. If you can run 10, you can run all day. Some people say you could run a marathon. Yeah. What was famous with Hopman was 2-on-1s. So 4 on a court, one person picking up balls. So 2-on-1s, you can have all 3 back. Keep in mind with the court, the players on the side, the coaches on the side of the court, putting the ball in play. People refer to that as shagging balls. You've done that where you're traveling on the tour, and people 2 players have a 30-minute court time, and you're on the side of the court so they don't have to stop to pick up balls. So all 3 back, all 3 up. Most common would be 2 players at the net volleying, 1 player at the baseline.
Yeah.
And it's great for fitness. Now, the one thing with the players at the net, a lot of times they just end up standing still. So it's not match simulated, and they end up having a lot of downward play on their volleys.
Yeah.
But that was in the 70s and 80s, everybody was doing 2-on-1s. As soon as there's an error, another ball is put back in play. Mm-hmm. I just think of Leighton Hewitt, hardworking Aussie. He was a throwback, to the players from the 50s and 60s with his work ethic. But I remember being in Indian Wells one time where, what he did with 2 people picking balls up for him. You could accomplish so much. Jimmy Connors got to the point where he sometimes would just practice 1 hour full out. Then people would read that, and a kid be 11 years old, go, Mom, Jimmy only practices for an hour.
Yeah.
Martina Hingis, when she came on the scene, she's horseback riding, doing all these different things. And juniors would say, they'd read, see that? She does all the different things. But they used to play all day when they were kids.
I remember watching Leighton at it was actually, I think, the Tennis Channel Open in Las Vegas, just in the Players Lounge before his match. He was off in the corner, headphones on, but he was just shadow swinging left and right, left and right, left and right, just shadow swinging, facing the wall, basically.
With Hopman, no one stops. I think when you watch college tennis teams, not to knock them down, but a lot of times the music is playing. They're doing 2-on-1s. This with the guys, the shirts off. The intensity is just not there.
Right.
You're picking up their own balls. With Hopman, I would say nothing. When he came to the court, he stepped on the court. Nothing was casual. It was like, let's go to work.
Yeah.
You can do it where you're doing a 2-on-1 where a player has to, they tag up to the service line, then move back in. So just to try to avoid the pitfall of having players stand in one place.
Right.
A couple comments on Jim Courier. He's not a rich kid, Plant City. He first, he tells the story. He was mowing lawns and saving money and paid $50 to go to Hoffmans. And then his mother, Linda, spoke to Harry. He was at Harry Hoffman's first. He went there first and was with Bollettieri second. Mm. But Nick got to the point where he's giving everybody a scholarship. Nick has gone bankrupt a few times. IMG bailed him out. So because of that, because anybody, Nick, anytime he'd see a player, he'd say, hey, you want a scholarship? And so they ended up having more players and better players.
I remember watching a story, a special something on Courier, where he would run, it was either 3 or 6 miles, several miles with a tire tied to him, with a rope. And then he had a tire just behind him and he would run. So
yeah,
sure,
I think
that goes back to his work ethic with Hopman maybe starting.
Well, actually, it goes, there's connections there for sure. Pat Etchenberry.
Yeah.
With one thing Borg used to do at the French Open, he played it 8 times, lost. He won it 6. He only lost to one player. He lost to Pinata twice at the French. But on an off day, he'd go run 10 miles. What Courier did is he would actually, win a 5-set match, and then he'd run around the grounds. A lot of times then you get out of sight, stop running, but he did that really intimidate people.
Intimidation, yeah. Yep.
So Nick Bollettieri, you gotta love Nick Bollettieri, married 8 times, but only 7 women. So imagine it's going, you're the one. It's going to work out this time. Second time around. But there was a lot of backroom deals. I don't think that, certainly to this day, that's not really the case with Hoffmans. Hoffmans is, you think, going back to the day geographically, at one point, one is in Tampa, the other one's in Sarasota, the other in Tampa and Bradenton and Wesley Chapel. For our listeners, those locations are not too far apart from each other. Mm. But, there's a number one player who certainly had a time with Mr. Hoffman, Jim Courier, so many. Yeah. This is a pearl. I love this one. I didn't know this for the longest time. Maureen Conley from San Diego, American player. Little Mo. A lot of kids play the Little Mo tournament, and they don't even know who Maureen Conley is.
Yeah, right.
In 1953, she won all 4 majors. She was coached by Harry Hopman. He hired her for that year. Mm. She hired Mr. Hopman for that year.
Yeah.
Her story, she was coached by Wilbur Folsom, then Eleanor Teach Tennant. But yet, even though, and Folsom, the story is that, he was at a park and he just felt that Maureen Conley was outgrowing his expertise. So he did the admiral thing and recommended that she work with Teach Tennant. But it is what is written about that is what she hired Hopman, just knowing that he was so demanding as far as physical fitness.
Yeah.
And that would be the difference maker. So, all the success with Australians, but 1953, he coached Maureen Conley.
Yep. Pretty successful year.
Yeah. But, Mr. Hopman, Da, 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 da. I'm going to start singing on these podcasts.
That's pretty good. Why don't you do that again? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
He didn't really have to advertise. You know, when you have that type of success with the legends he worked with.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of positives about Nick, but he was pretty much like Barnum and Bailey, you know, with the marketing, the circus. Mr. Hoffman was the Jack LaLanne of fitness. Jack LaLanne, for our listeners, he was on TV as soon as the TV came out. And he was the guy who could do 1,000 push-ups. You know, the Guinness Book of World Records, 1,000 chin-ups.
Yeah.
But he also, like Mr. Hoffman, small, 5'6".
He would get into the juicing, right?
Yeah.
Later on he did, right?
Yeah, you know, he was into fitness, way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
But it was amazing is just basic exercises.
Yeah.
You know, it's incredible the number of really productive exercises that one can do with their body. But just the good old-fashioned push-up, sit-up, chin-up. Yeah. That was really Jack LaLanne. Nothing fancy, little props, just basic exercises.
Yeah.
And I think of Mr. Hopman, I think of Jack LaLanne. And that's again, not to, you know, beat up on kids today or the coaches of kids, but that's why to talk about Mr. Hopman is a lot of young kids, their parents are taking them here, there for tennis tournaments, and they can't do a push-up.
Yeah.
They can't do one quality push-up.
Yeah. Or pull-up. Or kangaroo hop, knee hop. Yeah.
The work of Harry Hopman should not be forgotten. Guardians are a game would be wise to do more research on why he was so successful. Now, there are certain parts of this story, like say, for example, there was no pro tennis. There was no above the table money.
Yeah.
But there's people that are in their 60s now. So, you know, my time with Mr. Hopman, in some ways it was indirect, it was brief. But, you know, I think of Howard Moore, Alvaro Bentancur, all the players. I just think a federation would be wise to say, okay, this is what Hopman did.
Yeah.
Because I think so many times, you know, people are into self-promotion and like, this is a new and better idea. And it just becomes marketing 101, and people are, again, self-promotion, I think, just says it all.
Yeah.
With
well, I feel like they have to reinvent everything.
Yeah, reinvent the wheel. Yeah. But hopefully, just in talking about Mr. Hopman, that we've formed a picture in our listeners' mind, and you just motivate. I'll talk a little bit about his books.
What do you think, Steve, like the biggest takeaway, I mean, for coaches listening, you know, I hate to say like today's kids or whatever, but things are a little different. I mean, what's the biggest takeaway? How can you take what Harry did into today's world or into somebody's junior program, or, you know, what would be like a few takeaways?
I mean, I can tell you a story about Vicky Duval. I only spent a short period of time with Vicky, but I coached her brother, and their uncle.
Got some pre and post video.
Brother Cedric. So her brother spent time with Uncle Rudolph, lives in Tampa, and so, you know, he would be walking around shadow swinging. So on her own accord, she told her mom, "Hey, I would like to go see Steve and work on my serve."
Yeah.
I remember telling Vicky, and this was like 11 o'clock at night, I said, "Vicky, you don't have a running program." Then I heard the door open and shut, and she went out for a run. But I think that's one, is that, I mean, there's so many, but you have to run.
Yeah. I think, you know, the whole idea of just recording and beating your personal best of a mile or a 400, whatever it may be, but at least a mile time. You know, we talk about that so much. Just, do you know your mile time? Keep working on your mile time, your personal best, and something you can work towards, especially juniors, you know?
We work with a young girl, and Today was her birthday, and so I said, well, as a gift, I'm going to, how's it go? I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit not being nice to you. But so she played these 2 matches in practice, and 2 visiting players she beat 6-0, 6-0. But I looked around, I said, we have a very small group here, but there's 7 boys here that have a higher UTR than yours. Or if they don't have a higher UTR, they have a winning record over you in practice.
Yeah.
And I said, what we need to do, if you want to play any of those guys, you're going to have to improve your mile time.
Yeah.
And then you say, okay, drop it by 10 seconds, something that's realistic.
Yeah.
But yeah, people need to be pushed. The honesty, you can't be as a stopwatch.
Yeah.
And it's not just a matter of running a mile and running long distance. It's like, okay, doing 17s or running lines.
Yeah.
Speed.
Yeah. Just becoming an all around athlete, right? So for people to try to implement that into their junior development programs, even just like, okay, everybody stop and do 10 kangaroo hops. I mean, just simple things like that work well,
Mr. Hopman was asked what happened in Tennis Australia, and his answer was the country became affluent and lost their hunger. I told a father today with his 2 boys, right now the best tennis players are coming from I wouldn't say impoverished areas, but they're not coming from country clubs.
It's the pride cycle. We've talked about that.
Say it again.
It's the pride cycle.
Elaborate.
No, so you're doing well, and you're going like, oh yeah, this is all me. It's I'm high and mighty. Things are going awesome, and then it takes something to humble you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then people are humble, and they're like, all right, I need some help, and so they'll be coachable or teachable again, and then they start doing well again, and then the same thing happens. They're like, oh yeah, it's all me, and they get confident and too confident maybe, and but that's in life as well as tennis. But yeah, so it's a cycle that continues. So you guys stay humble, hardworking.
Probably the longest time, consecutive weeks, 4 months, Tennis Europe, 14s. You just go through the draw. And the players generally from the wealthier countries, affluenza. It's difficult to have rich parents and hungry kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Rich parents, poor kids.
Yeah.
So he felt like people stopped working. But he never said Tennis Australia went down because he left. But I do think that was part of it. Granted, there was other factors. Again, it's the emphasis on Davis Cup remained after Mr. Hopman left, but as he said, people were they're out for themselves first. That's a verbatim a statement he made.
Yeah.
I think like a lot of places, people are becoming indoor people. The Aussies have always been known as outdoor people. Somebody's name who comes up fairly often. One of our students, a guy was with us. He went to the 2-year program in Tyler, Texas, and stayed on and continued his education, but was with us for 7 years. Craig Tiley. Actually, when he was a student of ours, he did a 3-week internship with Mr. Hopman. He did that in 1986. Hopman died in 85. But at that time, it still was referred to
as Hoffmans.
He took over Craig Tiley as Australia. He was first the director of player development. So in some ways, if you compare it to the 50s and 60s, that'd be like taking over the Boston Celtics, after Bill Russell retired. What Russell do with, 10 out of 12. I can't remember. It's so many. Now he's the CEO, and you hear often that he's Craig Tiley, the best tournament director in the world. The player development of Australia, like the player development in America, that's questionable. There's so many factors. The 4 richest tennis countries in the world are the 4 Grand Slam countries.
Yeah.
And I look at that, they're pretty much like rich kids. The more money you have, Jack Kramer was asked by the French at one time, we spend more money on tennis than anyone else. Why aren't we producing? And Kramer said, the answer's in your question.
Yeah.
You're spending too much money. With the books, 1957, I don't have a copy of this, Aces and Places. But 1975 and 1978, Lobbying in the Sun, and Harry Hopman's Winning Tennis Strategy. We touched upon that.
Yeah.
Previous podcast. They're the same book.
Yeah.
But they got Harry Hopman's name in it
Different
in 78.
cover. Yeah.
But having his name in it, that's how, well known he was. Get his title name, sell more books.
Yeah.
Some more Hopman quotes. I really got tired of seeing the Americans getting all the trophies, drinking all the champagne, and getting all the pretty girls. So he was motivating the boys. Trophies, champagne, and girls. Davis Cup was not played for 6 years because of World War II. The U.S. won the Cup 4 consecutive years following the war. Jack Kramer and the boys. But it was after that where the Australians really dominated. For doubles, you must remember one thing, that doubles is like a marriage. Nothing will destroy your union like the lack of communication. We must be a winning machine to win Davis Cup. We touched upon this. After tennis turned professional, the team life as we know it is over. Now it'll be every man for himself. The team life, serious training, solidarity, was over when big money came into the game. I think a great way to end the podcast would be the kangaroo jump. That's Mr. Hopman.
Yeah.
With Emerson, 300 today. Jim Burdick was one of our pillars. Late Jim Burdick, what a great coach. He was a huge fan of Mr. Hopman. So he came before. He's older.
Yeah.
And I think any and every coach, I think of like the Lansdorp 20. Yeah. Lansdorp 20 is a spin-off of what Hopman used to do. He used to do a drill very similar.
Sure.
With Lansdorp, he pounds the feeds very much like Mr. Hopman. Mr. Hopman obviously came first. Those two are always mentioned when it comes to feeding tennis balls. Harry Hopman, Robert Lansdorp. I mean, they just feed with different speeds and different spins. With Lansdorp, you just got to hit the ball deep over the service line, down line, cross court, and you got to get 20 in a row. And it's a real gasser. I mean, but you get to 17, you get to 18, you miss, you start again at 0.
Yeah.
But Verdick was just great. A player would drop the racket at a Jim Verdick practice. Everybody dropped. Every player had to drop the racket, and without nothing even being said.
Yeah.
Initially early in his career, he'd have to blow his whistle and yell. But one player drops her racket, or one player just yells out, "I can't believe it."
Yeah.
I think of one of Mr. Hopman's players, Neil Frazier. I think it was 61 where he won Wimbledon. I was watching him play the Grand Masters. He misses the shot and he yells out, "I can believe it."
I can believe it, yeah.
Humility was part of the production of what he instilled in his players. But Verdick would have people be doing kangaroo jumps. Just you'll show some negative body language.
Yeah.
Vandermeer as well. I mean, because Vandermeer learned so much tennis from Verdick.
Well, that's what I mean. Like in today's tennis world, just simple things like that. But I don't, how do you think they go over for most places if you were to do things like that?
Mom, I got shin splints, Mom.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's a problem is, there has to be an understanding between the parent and the coach and the player that, you've always said it, PPP, parental permission for pounding. You have to have that. Otherwise, you're going to get Mom, I don't want to go there.
No, that's where you have to have kids when they come out, they fill out a goal sheet and they say, I want to play Division I tennis. I mean, I can't tell how many kids write down, I want to be number one in the world. And that's the best goal to have. Well, I mean, we do tell people, I heard this from Noah Rubin not too long ago. And I know there's a coach in New York who used to always say this.
Yeah.
My goal is to have no goals.
Right.
So I do think that you can be too wrapped up in what your goal is and say, I simply want to get better.
Yeah.
Bill Harris, to book Amazing Racers, one of the best, if not the best culture of sport in America right now.
Yeah.
With what he's done with cross-country teams in high school in central New York. football teams will be running in place, knees up high, and the coach just goes, hit it.
Yeah.
Just belly flops, boom. They don't cushion their fall. They just hit the ground. He does that with his cross-country team.
Yeah.
Now, his theme is Spartan and Stoic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the way Hopman was. That's the way that was the times. So, I think that's many places in Europe, unlike say a country club in the U.S. where there's just the amenities, all these extras that you don't really need.
Yeah. So I think that's bringing it back to a junior program or player development programs, have players fill out a goal sheet, and then you just go, hey, here's what your goal is. One of the funniest things that happened here, we had a kid that was here for quite some time and then left, and he said, I have this goal, I want to do that, but I just don't want to work that hard.
Yeah. Tennis players are like water; they seek their own level. But Hopman was a gold standard. Definitely there's teaching and coaching. And we talked about it with Charlie Hollis.
Yeah.
I think, for example, we'll talk about it with our time with Vic Braden. Is Robert Lansdorf, when he came into the Kramer Club, he inherited a lot of really good juniors with a really good base.
Yeah.
I do think that there's a lot to be said about the Aussie coaches, the Aussie teachers that fed Mr. Hopman the players. That's where if tennis teaching, say in this country, the U.S., if the coaches, okay, this is basic, ready position, turn, short, simple, compact, and we all were to get on the same page, be out of the same book.
Yeah.
Tennis would go way up. With
so tough to get people on the same page.
No, I was just sent some film. Dave Anderson was interviewed on one of our podcasts, and I worked a handful of times for 5 minutes here and 10 minutes here, very, very little, just in visiting his place out in Dallas, Brookhaven. Mm-hmm. But Ashton Kruger, she won the Orange Bowl twice before she turned 18. So I think she won it at 16, 17, won the 18s.
Yeah.
But, he has, from her mom, that we can share this on social media, her hitting balls, very basically hitting ball off a cone.
Yeah, shadow swinging.
And going through fundamentals.
Yeah.
And that's where if the great base is really, it's more about going backwards and saying that the people who have gone before us, instead of, well, I got this new idea.
Yeah.
I've got 5 secrets, and I'm going to put them up online and get your credit card and give you those secrets after midnight.
Secrets.
Or by midnight.
Secrets. And for the most part, people they have a hard time with seeing a forehand follow through in slow motion. That's really what it comes down to, because if you have a long hitting zone, we go out to the target and your upper arm lifts and you have a high finish and you hold your balance, people just aren't used to seeing that. And so they freak out. Literally.
Well, there's certain things, we say lost arts, but some things that are dead. Check the checkpoints.
Yeah.
Hold your balance.
Yeah, because it's the happy, busy, good, right? It's in you can't, slowing things down isn't going to keep them coming back all the time.
I think the hype, and again, Terry's, Nick would give people a lot of confidence.
Baby.
But Hoffmans was first. And here's the boot camp, squad training.
Yeah.
It did become a business model where even adults would go through his program. Hey, this is how the pros train, and people wanted to find out. It is important to have great fundamentals, but with I think if we could just sum it up, the work ethic and bare bones. The less you have, the more you have.
Yeah,
and no complaints, no excuses.
So, I mean, for a parent listening or a coach, what advice would you give? How do you instill work ethic?
Well, you don't want the tail wagging the dog. And anything that can be measured can be improved. Mm-hmm. You really need to have, now everybody has a telephone in their pocket and there's a stopwatch.
Yeah.
And, you talk about the kangaroo jump, the frog jump to the net. Start at the baseline, it's 39 feet to the net. Mm-hmm. You can measure an athlete physically by how well they jump.
Yeah. So
I do think that, you do have to have some meetings with parents. I do think that it's a matter of going through the assessment. This is where you are technically, it's where you are tactically.
Just quickly, if you're listening, we have the player development assignment. It's a free course on our website, GreatBaseTennis.com, but it goes through the whole assessment process and the analysis and everything that's involved. So if you want to check that out, you can. It's free.
If people were to really study tennis, I remember spending 3 days with watching Jimmy Everett teach tennis. And a friend of mine set it up, and he was a good player. And Claire, the youngest of the 5 kids, she had just won the 12 and under Orange Bowl. But, the lessons were very, very inexpensive. People really need to thank Nick Bollettieri. When designer blue jeans came out, blue jeans used to just be blue jeans. Here in this country, it was just Wrangler blue jeans. And then Levi's came out.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, blue jeans were expensive, and it became the status quo. But coming back to private lessons, I don't really like private lessons. I rather give. I tell people that the private lesson is really it's regulated by the cash register. People aren't going to drive 20 minutes to a tennis club to take a 5-minute lesson.
Yeah.
I will say 12 5-minute lessons or better.
Yeah.
An industry norm in this country is, if you want some attention, you have to take a private lesson.
Yeah.
Well, you can't really work on technique in the drills. Well, this is how you go about it. But Hopman was all about squad training. The private lesson, then kids get so much attention.
Yeah.
Dennis Vandermeer, he didn't like the private lesson. You can show someone what to do in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
If you teach tennis well, you have the analytical eye. I'd say, okay, here's the flaw, here's the cause, here's the cure.
Yeah.
And now you got to go drill on your own.
Yeah. The other thing with squad training is that they push each other, right? I mean, Bollettieri's had that. Obviously, Hopman. But yeah, they push each other.
Well, that's where if you study the Aussies on the men's side, most recently you study, say, the Spaniards, but in the Swedes, it didn't happen with Borg. People thought Borg was a mystery, but when Wielander won the French, they had 6 guys in the top 10 at one time. So if camaraderie to travel with one another.
If he can do it, I can do it. Or if she, can do it,
the expense too. There are still a lot of clubs in Europe where you play for the club. Mm-hmm. You're proud to be part of that club.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter, I'm going to bop and shop. And, actually, there are coaches, I think more the coaches that are paid salary, like say a school coach, that they cross the line. I think in tennis, it's just the opposite. They're basically a commission paid coach.
Yeah.
So if you like the lesson, you come back.
Yeah.
So then what happens is you start to kill the kid with kindness, and it's not really even coaching anymore.
Yeah.
So I just think, I worked at one academy training coaches. You learn by traveling. The teacher generally learns more than the student. But the academy had a vocabulary list, just 50 key words. And I think we could end by saying respect with Fred.
Yeah, do you want to be loved or do you want to be respected?
Yeah, Natalia Sorkin, we interviewed her, and I've heard her say, obviously this comes from generations before, but I've heard her say it, hate me now, thank me later.
Yeah.
And I tell parents all the time, if your kid really loves practice, it most likely is a lousy practice. and we said it earlier, misery enjoys company. Mm-hmm. So common sense, tough love, go to work. It's like with labor, labor obviously, his two coaches, Charlie Hollis and then Hopman, he saw Borg play for the first time. They said, "What do you think?" And he said, "He's going to be great. He's got happy feet."
Yeah.
We see people and it's like they're wearing moon boots.
Yeah, I watched a video for 2 minutes today. It was a junior match, 12-year-old warming up, and it was like, strokes, but then it was just like flat-footed.
We have a backboard, and it's got really an Australian name. We call our backboard Wally. And
Wally.
I ask kids all the time that visit, I go, where you're training, do you have a backboard? And almost every time the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes down to, you read about great tennis players, they all spend endless hours on a backboard.
Yeah.
And if there's any way, the listeners, I always tell people come to visit us, they'll work on their tennis game, and I'll say, if you can, if you're the homeowners association, if sometimes people live in a third floor apartment, they can't do it, but if you could build a backboard, there's so many great stories like Kevin Anderson. Wozniacki. I mean, just Jimmy Connors all winter long. That's all he could do is hit on a backboard.
Yeah.
And I think that's Hopman understood reps. Movement, fitness, mental toughness, no complaints, hit more balls.
Yeah.
And live balls and the speed of balls coming at you. But also to the basics, there was no one-up, one-back doubles. And it was come in and, granted, he was teaching an era where 3 of the 4 Grand Slams were on grass.
Right.
And by the second week, it's famous at Wimbledon where they didn't have the money to have an army of people pull the tarp over the grass, and people by the second week are wearing spikes. So, there's all sorts of circumstances on, Malcolm Gladwell, the book Outliers, a story of circumstance.
Yeah.
And, but even though there were so many things, the Aussies, just love of country, love of wearing the green and gold and playing for a Davis Cup. There's so many reasons that they were great, and there's so many reasons that, Tennis Australia is not going to match what they did in the 50s and 60s. Tennis is now global.
Yeah.
When it became an Olympic sport. But at the same time, to just go back and, same thing in our country is that if we want to produce more players, we should have an understanding of what Harry Hopman stood for.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed part 2 of our series on Mr. Harry Hopman.
Thanks.
If you've missed the part 1, go back and listen to that. A lot of history, a lot of great insights. If you have a chance, leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. That'd be great. And until next time.
Yeah, and I hope a couple of our comments have helped somebody put together a fitness and footwork program.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, thanks again.
All right, everybody. Thanks. See you in the next one.